My name is Cheria, and for a living, I turn workplaces into growth spaces. This podcast is a front row seat into my own personal and professional development as I talk with inspiring people about the growth that takes place at the intersection of work and life. Welcome to Grow There with Cheria. About a year ago, I had an aha that shook me to my core. And it had to do with my own personal origin story. We all, every single one of us, have an origin story to how we got here. And some of those are positive origin stories, some negative, some challenging, some beautiful. Sometimes our origin story starts from the moment we're born. Sometimes it starts later in life. But we all have stories that we've learned about the beginnings of our lives. And one of my origin stories is when I was born, my parents really wanted a boy. This was a time in life where that was something that parents often wanted. And my parents wanted a boy so badly, and they were believers. And so they prayed that I would be a boy, and they were believing in faith that I would be a boy. And so they called me Brian for the 9 months that I was in my mother's womb. And then I came out and I wasn't a boy. And they didn't have a name for me, and all they had was boys' clothes for me. That's actually not true. They had a name on file for me, uh, but they hadn't prepared. Literally, my baby clothes are me in, not that there's boys and girls' clothes these days, but I'm wearing blue for boy, which is what it was back then, uh, clothes when I came home. And my parents told me this story, and they always told me it in a really loving way. Funny enough, they also called my sister Brian for 9 months when she was in my mom's belly, but, they really got it wrong. God had other plans. But they always told this story, and honestly, it was a really sweet story. My dad talks about how, the moment he held me and I touched his face, he just melted. Any desire for a boy, gosh, I'm getting choked up telling this story. Any desire for a boy just completely melted away. He and my mom fell in love with me from the moment I came into the world. And it's a really sweet story. But as a little kid, I internalized that story differently. My sister, I later found out, did not do this. But for me, I told myself in that moment that I would never let my parents regret not having a boy. I would never let my parents wish that they would have had Brian instead of Cheria. And this aha shook me to my core because it made me realize so much about my personality has come from the fact that since I was a little child, I've been competing with my imaginary brother. I feel like just that alone, it still wipes me out just to think about it. And today you're going to hear from our guest who's going to share a little bit about his journey. His journey got me thinking about our origin stories because our origin stories sometimes unconsciously shape so much about how we show up and we don't even realize it. I'm so excited to get into my conversation with our guest. So here we go. Jesus Chavez began his career in technology consulting at Accenture. Years later, he went on to serve in several executive roles at Univision, helping shape strategy, affiliate relations, licensing, and digital operations across 72 stations in 22 markets. He went on to bring his entrepreneurial spirit to Mitu as COO, Vertical Networks as CEO, and Cabra Sports, which is a U.S. Latino youth sports fandom platform, as a co-founder. Today, Jesus has returned to Televisa Univision, or Televisa Univision, as SVP and West Coast head of local media, content, and operations, leading across television, radio, digital, and social platforms. I first met Jesus in 2018, where he served on the Digital Innovation and Advisory Council for ALSAC St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. And he later became the chair of that council. And what I always loved about it is Jesus just brought such a powerful mix of media expertise and entrepreneurial vision and a deep commitment to culture, community, and of course, innovation. So let's get to it. It's time to grow there with Jesus Chavez. All right, Jesus, welcome. Hello, you are here. I'm so happy you're here. Thank you for joining me on the
I am
podcast.
so happy to be here with you. I was super excited about having this conversation with you. So glad to be here. Glad to get the invite finally. No, I'm kidding.
Oh my God, finally.
Finally, right?
Listen, you've been on my list for a long time. I just didn't know how long I was going to need to warm you
Yeah.
up to get you to come on.
Are you like the
Um,
Netflix from back in the day where you had the queue, like 2 years worth of
yeah,
queue that
exactly.
you know.
Listen, to be fair, I mean, kind of actually, I guess so. I have, and I could show you this, a like a PowerPoint doc that I have that your face is on it, that I like grabbed all y'all's faces
Mhm,
from LinkedIn and was like, these are the
mhm.
people that I want on
Oh,
the
I love that.
podcast at different
Yeah.
points. So you're definitely on that. But listen, I'm really excited, especially about this conversation because you already were like, I'm not going to tell you what we're going to talk about. So
Yeah,
I
no.
don't know really the story you're going to share with me today. And that makes me, I don't know, it feels thrilling for me.
Mhm.
It feels so thrilling to have no idea. So, you know the deal. I'm asking for a story from a time when something in your personal life impacted you
Yeah.
professionally or vice versa. And I want you to tell me everything that happened and what you learned
Yeah.
from it and how you grew from it. So take it away. Tell me everything.
Oh, wow. No warm up, huh? All right. Then actually was thinking about this, and to be candid with you, I wasn't entirely sure which direction to go with this conversation. So I actually have a couple of things that I wanted to share with you, different stories that are very different in terms of both personal, but very different in terms of the impact that it has in terms of how I view the world professionally.
Mm.
So let me start with the first one. So I think part of it actually speaks to just generation, right? So I grew up in a generation where you sort of came in and you worked, like you work hard, like there's no
Mm.
excuses. The whole thing about work life balance, especially at the beginning of your career, like just didn't exist. I remember
Yeah.
coming in. Um, I did my undergrad at UC Santa Barbara, and I studied engineering. Right, I studied mechanical
Mm.
engineering. I even got an emphasis in robotics, and I never touched it. Right, like kind of halfway through
Wow.
school, I realized that it just wasn't really my thing. And I felt like a calling more onto the business side of the equation. And as a result of that, my first role right out of college was to go and work for Accenture, right? So big tech consulting shop. And I remember coming in when I first came in, and it was like during like towards the end of the dot-com bubble, right? I remember one of the projects that we were on, I was working a lot of hours, and we were wrapping up every day till like 8:30, 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. And I was an analyst, and sort of whole like all the analysts kind of like hang out, and we all kind of work together.
Yeah.
I remember there was people in the group with me that were like, "Oh my god, we're working so much." And I remember thinking at the time, and I think I said it, I was like, "Yeah, like this is not bad. Like I just finished engineering. Like if we were done before midnight, I was like ecstatic." So to me, working and getting out at 10 o'clock at night was like great. Like I literally enjoyed it. I enjoy the sort of like the intensity, the work, and
Yeah.
didn't even think of myself in terms of like, oh, I should be trying to find more balance, right? I was, 21,
Mm.
21 years old. Like there was no like this was like the only thing and probably most important thing that I had going on in my life at the time. And
Yeah.
I would say in many ways it that sort of mentality shaped a lot of the early stages of my career, right?
Mm.
When I eventually made it back to business school, and went to UCLA. And I remember even then sort of having this sort of same time. It was like very like corporately driven, very driven to try to succeed, very driven to do whatever it takes to get there. And one of the personal challenges that I've had is I am I've always been very hard on myself about I
Mm.
just don't give myself excuses, right?
Yeah,
And it's
yeah,
the kind of thing that, oh, you could just work through it. Like it's almost a mentality. I think part of it, frankly, I think is cultural. I think part of that idea is that when you know, you have parents who are my parents are immigrants. We have parents that are immigrants. They work so hard to get here. They work so hard to
yeah,
get here, to stay here, that they make no excuses. If it requires having
yeah,
2 jobs, 3 jobs, doesn't matter. Like, you're just gonna do it.
yep,
And there's actually a saying, that a Spanish saying, which I use it now as a joke more than anything else, but it was very true. It's like, whenever someone would complain about working hard or working too much, they would always be asked a question back, like a sarcastic question, right? You will get,
uh-huh,
and the question would be, "Es querías norte," right? And what it means
mm,
literally is you want it north. Now, what it meant is like, well, you wanted this, like, now, yeah, like, don't complain. You wanted this life, you
yeah,
wanted this work.
yeah,
But that speaks
mhm,
so much to a mindset, to almost a worldview, that everything is done
yeah,
through hard work, and when the work is hard, you just work harder. Like, if you're tired, you
mm,
work harder. And so, in many ways, I would say that mentality, which I still, and as much as I think I'm better at it, I still, it's still there, you know, is
sure,
uh has helped me in a lot of different ways. Has helped me in a lot of ways, and be able to succeed at things, and being able to maybe take things that would have been frankly easier to quit, easier to not try as hard, what would be the case. But and it's part of that mentality, that sort of hard work ethic. But what I found, especially as I started to rise in the corporate world and started to go from a contributor to a leader to a manager to, from a manager, actually that's a better place to put it, from a contributor to a manager to a leader, that distinction between
yeah,
manager and leader, I started to notice that I had a what I would consider somewhat of a critical flaw. And my
mm,
critical flaw was, I felt that at times I lacked empathy. And I lacked
mm,
empathy specifically around working hard, around putting a lot of effort. And in many ways, I always felt like, well, working hard that's just the ticket to get into the show. Like, that's not even saying what the show's good
mm,
or not. Like, if you don't have work
mm,
ethic, you don't have fire in the belly, like, what are we talking about? But I
yeah,
felt that it actually created a dynamic where I wouldn't always recognize where, at times, the best thing wasn't to just keep on pushing, just keep on driving, but to pause and give people the moment to, whether it was vent, whether it was simply acknowledge the work that they were doing. And for me, it was natural because I never would do that for myself. Like, I'm the kind of
mhm,
person, sure, that I don't celebrate things. Like, I have a hard time celebrating things. And I
yeah,
remember, um, I was, actually, you know, I've been married before, and, in my first marriage, I was going through grad school, right? And graduation was gonna come up for business school. And I remember, my ex-wife at the time telling me, she's like, "Aren't you excited? Aren't you excited about me graduating from business school? Like, this is a big deal. Like, you've been wanting to do this for a long time, and, like, this is a big deal." And I was like, "No." Oh, like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "Well," I'm like, "Well, I'm not surprised I'm graduating. Like, I've been working at it. Like, this is exactly what I expected because I put in all the work to do it." But it was like,
yeah,
and it's like this lack, but that spoke a lot to the mentality that I had then, you know?
yeah,
And once
yeah,
again, how I started to see, and it worked fine when I was a contributor, because when you have that mindset, you're
mhm,
just gonna grind it out no matter what. Like, people love having folks like that in your team. Like, you know, they're gonna
yeah,
figure it out.
yeah,
They're gonna figure it out. And look, and in many ways, I will tell you that it benefited me tremendously. I would say early in
mm,
my career, part of why I think, promoted a lot and kind of moved up a lot was the fact that I had this, like, general attitude that the best way that I felt that I could add value was to solve difficult problems, to solve things
mm,
that were not well defined, to solve the things that people no
yeah,
one wanted to take on. And I
yeah,
have very much that, I'll do it. Like, I'll take that on. Like, I don't know what it's gonna be. I don't know how to solve it, but I'll figure it out. And
yeah,
that was all the good. And then I started, as I once again went from contributor to manager to leader, started recognizing that it was a little bit of an issue. You know, and I would say, my early attempts of trying to solve for it, well, at least, you know, it's like, you know, like, what do they say about recognizing it, like, about solving any problem, is the first thing is recognizing that you have a problem, right?
Yes.
So that I would say that was kind of my first kind of stage of that, right? It started to recognize like, man, I really do like lack empathy with people. And I feel like I'm a pretty empathetic person in a lot of things, right?
How were you coming to that realization, though? What was happening
I
that
was luck so yeah, good question. So it wasn't so much that I was so self-realizing. It was more that I was lucky enough to have people that worked for me who trusted me enough and who I had done enough of building trust with them that they felt comfortable enough telling me that. And I
Yeah,
found
yeah,
myself multiple times, I will tell you, where I would like meeting with a team and we were talking about an issue and there was some genuine like feelings being shared and the way people were sort of talking. By the way, this is before some of like our younger generation of like Gen Z folks that sort of come into the equation. And
yeah,
my response just wasn't kind. It was more like, okay, I'm like, "No, I hear you, but we still gotta like do what we need to do." And like I would like almost
yeah,
bypass that moment of like I just need some acknowledgement. And I had a few people share that with me, and one in particular who worked with me, um, and she was very empathetic and her
mm,
radar was very high. And it almost became
mm,
a little bit of a I don't call it a joke, but it was like we would have sometimes these meetings and I'm like right after it finished, I was like, okay, let me go call her and see like what like
mm,
tell me like what did I
yeah,
do? Like how did I handle it today? Like how was I
yeah, yeah,
with the EQ aspect of things? And did you think I was having the right level of sort of empathy versus like driving
yeah,
the team to do something? And that was really helpful, frankly, having that. But what at the time, what I felt is that I was starting to do a better job of recognizing when that was started to come out. And it's so funny because when you're doing it, I will tell you that I never thought I was being harsh with anyone because I was significantly harsher with myself.
mm,
So compared to that, I
mm,
was like, no, I'm being like, kidding. Like, I'm
yeah,
being like super like understanding and
yeah,
try to be very, very clear about everything. And um
mhm.
and that's part of like the not recognizing it.
I think that's such an important point, though, because I think a lot of times the way we lead or manage people, or even I'm not a parent, but I imagine sometimes the way we parent our
Yeah.
kids is we do it in a way that only we know to do it, or only we parent from a place or manage from a place of like, this is what I need, and so this is what I'll provide, but we don't always personalize that experience for
Yeah,
other
for sure.
people because it's just natural. It's so natural for us to like operate from our own kind of personal worldview. And it takes brave people willing to kind of tap you on the shoulder and say
Yeah.
like, "Hey, you might have a blind spot in this area," for you to even really question it, because for what might look like self-love to you, which is maybe pushing yourself harder
Right.
and like figuring out how to encourage yourself to grit and grind, might feel like the exact opposite for someone else.
100%. And I think it speaks to that. I think it also speaks to the importance of having um like diverse perspectives and individuals
Yeah.
that complement your skill set, complement or simply just have a different perspective that you do. Because it is easy to not see it, even if it's painfully obvious to
Mhm.
everyone else. And
Yeah.
having that, I found a lot of value, especially with having team members that were and look, some of it I think is orientation, right? But I did feel that some of our female team members were just better at it. They were just more they
Mm,
were just more aware. Like the subtle cues, they were
mm,
just better at it. And
mm,
having that someone under my team that was that and was very close enough to me to be able to share that with me was super valuable.
mm.
Now what changed, right? Because I feel like it's still
Yeah,
something that I still sometimes have to like I mean, it's just, part of how you're kind of built a certain way, right?
for sure, yeah.
But I would say like I went through a pretty big transformation and realized like how big of an issue I actually had. And it all
Mm,
started when my daughter was born. So I had my
mm,
daughter when I was 35. And at 35, professionally, I already had quite a bit of, I had a good run. I would say I had a good run. I,
yeah,
I I was very
yeah,
pretty, pretty high up in my company, and and had a lot of responsibility already, and but had this what I would describe, especially now as this big blind spot. And as my daughter was born, I found myself like, especially as she was kind of starting to grow up, and even as a little toddler, like I would have a hard time communicating with her. Like I felt
Mm.
like everything made her cry. Like
Mm.
my simple, and it was like she was little, like she was, a year and a half, and I would speak to her, and it would just make her cry. And I would get so frustrated, like, what am I like? I'm not upset. I'm
Oh.
just speaking to her.
Yeah.
Like, and he's like,
Oh.
what am I doing? Like, it was kind of thing like I couldn't understand what I was doing and how I was communicating. That
Mm.
it was literally one of those less about what I was saying and how I was saying it, or how it would come
Mm.
across to her, and that she would just take it poorly, and it would make her emotional. She would start crying.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what was interesting, at least for me, is that it really made me much more aware of what I was, because it was a great example, a great life lesson that if I wanted to be able to communicate with her, I could be right of what I'm saying and feel righteous of how I'm doing it,
Mm.
but I wasn't gonna get the right outcomes unless she actually listened, absorbed it, processed it, was able to do something with it, right?
Yeah.
And how I was communicating was directly impacting that. So I could sit here and be
Mm.
upset that this 2-year-old, 3-year-old is like crying about how she feels I'm communicating with her and be like, I'm doing nothing wrong. Like, what are you talking about?
Uh-huh.
Option B is like, man, you really have to rethink the way that you speak and the way that you communicate. And
Yeah.
what are the subtle things that you're not thinking about when you're communicating
Mm.
that she's picking up on? And I think she's been one of my greatest teachers for that reason. And I think part of it
Mm.
happens, I think with some people, and it definitely happened to me, where sometimes having kids softens you a little bit, right? It changes
Yeah.
priorities a little bit in terms of how you
Yeah.
view the world. So I think there was a combination of things. I think part
Oh.
of that happened, but I think that specific communication styles with her and her being a kid that was just very like sensitive in the sense that she really picked up on my subtleties. And even as she was
Mm.
growing up, it was interesting because she would, if I was bothered or upset about something, she was really good at picking that up. And she would
Mm.
get quiet and like, well, I think you're upset with me. I'm like, I'm not upset with you. And I'm looking at myself, man, like I'm either a terrible poker player or like this kid has like a radar like nothing other, all right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just fine, a little bit of both. 'Cause I'm not a poker, so
Probably.
I'm not
Uh-huh.
gonna pick that up anytime soon. But I would say that's something that I really leaned on, learned from, and actively tried to apply it to how I
Mm.
operated. And the first time I became CEO of a company, it was interesting because up to that point, I had always felt, especially in leadership roles, that I tend to be the youngest guy or one of the younger people in the
Mhm.
room, and yet with a lot of
Mhm.
responsibility. And it was the first time where I went from being the youngest guy to the oldest guy. Right. And I
Mm.
was running a startup, and not only a startup where the majority of my team was like a generation removed from me, but they were like 2 generation removed from me, right? So,
Yeah.
and the just the way to communicate and the way to manage a team that frankly many times was even uncomfortable having conversations, let alone actual
Mm.
conversations.
Yeah.
I would find myself in situations where I would see the dynamics in our teams where there's like a literally a whole debate happening between people in person, but all on Slack. And they wouldn't
Oh
talk to
my
each other.
god.
They literally would not talk to each other. And I was like this kind of passive aggressive and it just not being clear. And like, and in those moments, I would really try to lean into that, leading from a place of empathy as much as I could, more to
Mm.
aim to understand the other side much more. Because at the end of the day, I sort of would think about the same thing is if I'm not effective in communicating, it doesn't matter if I'm right. Ultimately, it's
Mhm.
my loss,
Mhm.
because I'm trying to do
Yeah.
something that they're doing, they want to do differently. And if I can't do that, or if I don't do that, it has a pretty big impact. So it's really interesting. And I think the other thing that I did quite a bit of is I always try to have individuals in my team who I really go out of my way to make sure to say, like, please share your feedback with me. Like, I know
Yeah.
sometimes Maybe I can be a little serious. I think when you just know me personally, you know that I joke around quite a bit. But if you don't know me that well, I have like a more, I don't know, like stoic, I guess, like maybe
Yeah.
presence. He said, but I really want to hear from you. And do I have a strong point of view? Of course I do. I didn't get you without a
Mhm.
strong point of view. That's
Yep.
and do I with a strong point of view, do I times want to debate or talk things through? Sure, I do. But that doesn't mean I don't
Mhm.
listen. That doesn't mean I'm not looking for that
Yeah.
feedback. And I really need you
Yeah.
to, even if it's hard, like I need you to say, and whenever something would happen where someone wouldn't share that feedback, and they would tell me afterwards, I'm like that's a missed opportunity. Like, please
Mm.
do not like I need that. I need you to do that for me. And if you don't do that, if you're
Yeah.
still something
Yeah.
I'm not seeing, like that's a huge issue. And so I really leaned into that aspect of trying to lead through more like connection, trying to lead more through
Yeah.
listening. Um, while of course start trying to be clear about guidance and communication. Uh,
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
person that I worked with years ago, and he gave me like this. He used to have all these little sayings, right? And this one that he
Mhm.
said that I really loved. He was like, when you're a leader, is sort of like standing in the middle of an iceberg. And
Mm.
when you don't go out of your way to go to the outskirts of that iceberg and see what's going on and talk to people and get feedback, and you stand in the middle of the iceberg, that thing may be melting all around you. You're gonna be the last one to find out. So
Mm.
it's
Mm.
not on them, it's on you to go out and have those
Yeah.
conversations, have a connection. And I think I had that part right, but the part I felt like I was missing is without the empathy side of the conversation, people are not always to be honest with you, even if you're asking. People are going to be
Mm.
as open or willing to share things with you, even if you're asking, and therefore we lose
Yeah.
that effectiveness.
I think that's so important. And, I think one of my favorite things that they say about empathy is that empathy is different from, I think Brene Brown might talk about this, that empathy is different from sympathy, that when we sympathize with someone, we usually put distance between ourselves and
Right.
that. So that person and their feelings. So we say, okay, I'm sorry you feel that way,
R
or you're right. Like no one wants to hear that.
Yeah.
Um, and or we see them and we feel like, "Oh, I," like, we feel pity for their feelings, but that is self-protective. When we have empathy, we're willing to feel with a person, and I think when you talk about your daughter, when you're getting such a quick reaction and response from your daughter at a young age, and all your biology is also just going towards, "Oh my gosh, one, what did I do?" Like, "What are you feeling?" Trying to feel with this little creature that doesn't even know how to express themselves yet. That is, like, the core of the practice, right? Is trying then to really understand not only what they're experiencing, but what you've done to cause that experience, that reaction from them. And I think it's such like a potent moment
Yeah.
that we don't always get in life when you have like a direct action and response, right? And so when you're kind of zooming it out and bringing this into the business world, what I'm hearing you say is how critical it is that you are continuing to massage those relationships with people who are going to feel brave enough and willing to tell you the truth about how they're feeling so that you're given the opportunity to feel with them and adjust where needed and push where needed. But
Right.
until you actually get yourself in the space of being able to feel with those people, it's much harder to move the ship forward no matter what
Yeah.
you're doing. It's much harder because there's gonna be resistance and friction. But once you can feel with folks, then you can actually liberate everyone in kind of like, okay, what are the next steps then that we need to do to get people feeling safe and ready,
Yeah.
still to drive for results, still to do what is needed, but to not feel like what they're their feelings or initial reactions or whatever it is are invalid, and I think that it goes such a long way.
And I would even take it a step further is that when you're in a leadership position or you are looking to lead, frankly, leading people that work for you and that technically need to do what you're asking them to do, well,
Mhm,
a work setting, right? Like that's not hard. Saying, "Hey, I
mhm.
need you to do this and do A, do B, do C," like, and I need you to do it. That
Yeah.
is, people may do it right, may do it well. That's a certain, but
Mhm,
for the most part, they'll look to do it. I think what's significantly harder, and this is probably more of the reality in most business situations, as rarely do most of us are in situations where every single person that we work with works for us. And in those dynamics, and therefore, many cases, what it is the people that you're trying to rally or trying to help move in a certain direction, it has to be much more of a collaboration, a partnership. And I think that's where trust is way more important. So this idea of being
yeah.
able to influence and lead people that don't work directly with you or for you is a really important skill set that I frankly didn't even realize how important it was until I got higher up
Mhm.
in organizations, until I went from the corporate world to startup world. I mean, the startup world, and you know this, right? Is like how much of
Mhm.
it is all tied to partnerships, collaboration, building mutual trust, being
Yeah.
able to move things in unison
Yep.
with people that don't have to do that with you or for you,
Yep.
right?
Mhm.
And I think going back to that, so if that's the case, then the trust piece is an important element. Part of building that trust is trying to be more mindful of understanding the other side, the other perspective,
Yeah.
right? And I think
100%.
that's something that is it's interesting because I feel like it's one that I've really have tried to lean on. And I think for some of us, and I'll put myself in that category, is sometimes not as natural, right? And I go back to that
Mhm.
is like
Yeah.
I can be so harsh with myself on a given basis
Mm.
about
Mhm.
what I'm supposed to do, trying to do, should do. Um, that is like I don't make any excuses for myself ever.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
fact that I'm
Yeah.
calling them excuses is probably a problem, right? So like that already speaks,
Yeah.
right? So like
Mhm.
I'm actually, by the way, I have a couch here in the office. I may have to go lay out. And we're having a therapy
Yeah,
session, I think,
that's
at this
right.
point. But you see what I'm saying? Like that's the mentality.
Yeah.
And that's like, and
100%.
you have to like literally fight against that to be.
It's funny. It's funny because, you know, so years ago, this was at St. Jude. We were working on our accelerator and we were standing up, a new function within the business. And one of the things that I was leading a session on, they asked me to lead a session on empathy and how important that was going to be to our work. And we talked about empathy all the time on the innovation team because for us, empathy is the beginning of innovation. You can't actually do any effective or meaningful innovation without starting with empathy for whomever your customer or user or whatever, whoever they are. And so I'm getting ready to give this talk on empathy and how to operationalize empathy. And I'm kind of preparing for it and I'm getting so annoyed because I I'm like so frustrated that I have to talk to people about empathy, even though it's something that we talk about all the time. But I realized my frustration was coming from the idea that I have very little empathy for people who don't have empathy.
Oh,
And
interesting. Yeah.
so I I ended up talking about that as part of my talk.
Yeah.
And but I had to go and investigate this, and it turns out that empathy truly is a skill that some people have naturally, some do not, and it can 100% be developed over time. So it's not something that if you're not born with it, you won't ever have it, but it's definitely not a guarantee that we all have empathy. And I think that's really important for people to know because I think a lot of us including me at the time, feeling like I don't have empathy for people who don't have empathy until I realized not everybody is like has that naturally, is that we've got a lot of it's not uncommon to be someone who just doesn't naturally have empathy. That is
Right.
not uncommon and it's not something that's bad about you or anyone else who doesn't naturally have that because there's many other qualities that you have that were necessary for the way that you survived and coped in life, and having a high degree of empathy wasn't necessary at those times
Mhm. Yeah.
necessarily. And over time, it needs to be developed. And I think the distinction that you're also making when you go from individual contributor to a certain extent to manager, but 100% to leading, you can't lead effectively without developing that skill of empathy. And I think there's a lot of folks who end up climbing up that ladder because of talent and skill and ambition and get to the top and then realize, oh crap, I actually now need to learn
Yeah.
this
It's
skill
like what
in order to.
yeah, what
Mhm,
got you here won't get you there, right? It's and I
100%.
think to your point, in terms of what was needed for you in certain environments, right? Then it doesn't become as useful in other environments. Um, listen, I grew up in Compton, right? I grew up in
Mhm,
the like hood. Like it was like
mhm.
the nice part. And there is actually a nice part of Compton.
Yeah,
And I think survival was a big present was an idea that was constantly present. This idea that
mhm,
you had to do certain things to survive and that
yeah,
there was a real possibility of not surviving. Maybe that's a better way to think about it, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
and so having work ethic, being focused, like keeping your head on straight on what you needed to do was such an important thing that we leaned on. And I would even say from my parents and bless them for being so supportive in every way that they can. It was like, you're gonna work hard. Like especially my mom. My dad
yeah.
was like, you're working hard and like I don't want to hear no excuses. So everything
Mhm,
that wasn't working hard was an excuse. Right. So when I start
mhm,
talking
that's right.
about I don't make excuses for myself, like you gotta see where that comes from. And it's
Yeah,
and I think it's interesting in the sense that now going from that moment to as I talked about being a leader, and even now, I mean my daughter she just turned 14, right? And I find
mm,
myself having very different conversations with her than, of course, conversations that I had with my parents. It's a very different
yeah,
generation, and it's a lot more around trying to find ways to connect and to have her come to conclusions, have her come to alignment with me on things that she may not want to do or is interested in. And I think
mhm,
understanding or trying to at least understand her perspective as much as possible, right?
yeah,
And it's just so interesting how some of those elements, like, really do translate extremely well and are important,
yeah,
especially in the case of where you try to influence people, right? Like, the whole art of
mhm,
influencing
mhm,
people, and I mean in a positive way, but I think that starts with building that trust and connection that we're talking about.
yeah. What we're talking about is somewhat stressful environments or stressful scenarios or, and I use the word stressful, but what I really mean is folks' nervous systems get, triggered based on a big change that's gonna happen or a new initiative that they don't really know what they're gonna do or fears around, like, layoffs or whatever. There's
Yeah,
all
sure.
these things, and folks have a lot of feelings, and those feelings, frankly, they themselves haven't even always had the time to understand what those feelings are, and I think as a leader there is this role of being able to see the person,
Mhm.
hear them, help them repeat back to them what it is that you're hearing from them so you understand where they're coming from. And then I always, give the Game of Thrones reference, then be the breaker of chains, mother of dragons to help them figure out the path
Yeah,
forward,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and that path forward is important because we can't what we need is to have an abundance of empathy and willingness to feel with people
Yeah.
whilst also understanding the imperative of the business and knowing how to move folks from being shut down by their feelings to empowered with whatever they need to move on to wherever you're going next. And I think that is the dance of leadership.
Yeah.
So much of it is helping to restore the nervous systems of your people, empower them so that you can drive for results. And ultimately, it's not just for the business, it's also for the individual sitting in that seat who wants to feel good about the work that they're doing and wants to feel good about what they're a part
Or,
of.
and sometimes it's good enough to simply once they feel acknowledged that the stuff is just wild right now. Like, we don't know.
Yeah,
It's wild. We don't know.
100%.
You know what? It is scary. And having even
Yeah.
that honest conversation of saying, "Yeah, you know what? You're right. I understand. Like, I get it. Like,
Mhm.
it's wild right now. I'm not sure if what we're trying to do here is gonna work, but
Yes.
at least here's the reason why we wanna do it. Hopefully, everyone gets the context. Here's why I think it's important. And frankly, let's go out and try to see if we can do it." Like, that's sometimes
Yeah.
that's okay, and I think that's sometimes what people get
Yep.
sort of, once again, not acknowledge that stuff, I think can become detrimental and, drive change, and I do agree with you. I think some of it is for some people, it's just so natural. It's interesting because I was telling you earlier about my daughter and how how I hate to say sensitive because it's not in a negative way. I don't mean that. I mean like how strong her radar is in picking up these subtle cues.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then my now fiance, who we're getting married later this year, she is exactly that way. She is a person that has
Mhm.
such a great empathy for people, such a great ability to
Mm.
connect and see you and see everything about you. Like I can't hide a thing from her because any little
Mm.
change in mood that I may have or anything, like she picks it up like nobody's business is. And I think it's so interesting how maybe it's part of what life is, right? Is you ultimately find those people in your life that can hopefully create that kind of balance that you're seeking. And for
Yeah.
me, it's been it's funny on both the professional and personal side. But these are, great teachers that I think I've had. I've had my daughter's been a
Yeah.
great teacher. I think my partner, I think she continues to be a great teacher for me because I really feel like I try to take those interactions and conversations and think about how do I then pair it with how I approach the world, how I approach things.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I think it just makes you more effective. And it's interesting because I just didn't think that was the case before. I mean, a quick
Mhm.
side note, when we were talking about feelings, when I was in school, in engineering school, okay, this is coming from like a 18-year-old or whatever it was, right?
Yeah.
19-year-old.
Yeah.
I remember whenever I would have to take an elective that was not an engineering class, I would call them my feelings classes. And the reason I call them my feelings classes is that everyone's classes, they will always ask you, well, how does that make you feel? Right? Like that was always a
Oh, yeah.
question, or what do you feel about that? And in
Yeah.
engineering, it was never that. Like it didn't matter how I felt about
Yeah.
thermodynamics. It either was or it wasn't. And I got to like figure it out, right? But I was
I love
that
that.
was so much cool years
I
later.
think there's an element here that I think is also, I don't know, tell me if this is too woo-woo of a conversation to have with you, but I think there's an element of also kind of this balance of, what I would call divine masculine energy and divine feminine
Oh yeah,
energy, and
sure.
I think this is where I think the workplace is still figuring out how to balance
Mhm.
those energies out, and I think it's one of the you know, we have we have done the over-indexing in the highly sometimes not divine masculine.
Right.
I think we're learning to incorporate the divine feminine that can feel into just the balance of doing really well. I'm now getting into, like, the balance of both this very it's to me, it's right hemisphere and left
Mhm.
hemisphere of the brain working really strongly. Our left hemisphere of the brain is focused on what it knows. It is always wanting to stick so much so that it will lie about what it doesn't
Yeah.
know to keep things concrete.
Mhm.
And so our workforces for many years have been very left hemisphere focused. The right hemisphere of the brain, though, is super zoomed out. It's seeing context, it's connecting pieces. It is comfortable in the unfamiliar and comfortable in the nuance. And the right hemisphere has, I think, historically been kind of pushed out of corporate thinking because it's too unharnessed. And I think what we're talking about in many ways is how do you take someone like you who has the skill and the drive and the know-how, who knows how to operate in that left hemisphere really well, but also bring in this zoomed out, connecting the dots, connecting the nuance so that we can start creating products at the end of the day, work
Mhm.
experiences that are really that's what balance is. Like, when we go back to the work-life balance and not really knowing what that means, blah, blah, blah,
Mhm.
I actually think that whole conversation of work-life balance always misses the mark. I think true balance in work and life is actually leveraging both hemispheres of the brain more effectively,
Mhm.
and, sometimes I think that's what my job is to do. This might be getting a little too
No,
esoteric,
no.
but
I enjoy this, yeah.
but yeah, I feel like that is sometimes as someone who works in culture,
Mhm.
I'm often trying to help folks not diminish that left hemisphere, not diminish that powerful, let's just call it divine masculine right now, but to turn on the right hemisphere,
Yeah.
to turn on the empathy, to turn on the ability to zoom out and connect dots differently, which is more also communal. And, that's another big difference between the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. The left hemisphere sees itself as an individual, while
Mhm.
the right hemisphere sees itself as part of something. And so this is like the again, I know this is getting esoteric, but this is the world that we're living in when I think we're having our language can talk to us about empathy versus not having empathy. But really, I think that's a conversation around how do you turn on the whole brain of your organization or your team.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I actually have, with my partner, we have a lot of these kind of conversations. So this is very much in
Mhm.
that kind of food group. I agree with you. And I think part of it as well is it does feel to me that the higher you go up in terms of leadership, is like the more you have to be aware of these things and whether it's developing themselves, you yourself developing some of those elements, or being aware enough to complement your team,
Yes.
your to have that kind of perspective, I think is extremely important. I think for anyone that has ever tried to build a company or lead an organization, launch a startup, I joke that being a CEO of a startup is you both have to be like driven enough to like have the work ethic to make something happen, but also be naive enough to think that even can happen, right? It's like there's a combination
Mhm.
of naive, it's a combination of like work, naive, and vision, right? You have to like go back, big picture, like this is what all the
Yeah.
possibilities that it could be, and then be naive enough to think you can actually can do it, right? Because if you actually
Yes.
think about all of the things that need to happen, both
Mm.
the things you need to work on, and sometimes the way the podcast will kind of go your way a number of times for that to actually happen, like no one would ever want to launch anything. It's just too hard. Right? So you
Yeah.
kinda need both of
Yeah.
those things, and I think when it comes to leadership, it is super important to pull into those kind of different elements. Years ago, I was part of this, leadership program that we would go to DC once a month. I went for, like, 7 months or 8 months, right? And, we talked about a bunch of different things there. It was through the NAB, and, but one of the things that we covered one weekend, right? I would, like, fly in on Fridays and then leave on Sundays. Um we were talking about leadership and we did those like one of these leadership assessments. This one was, I think, was called Discover Your Strengths. I think it was called, right?
Oh, yeah.
And
Mhm.
it was very interesting. You would, like most of these things, you would do a survey. It would like highlight what are your like your 5 top strengths, right? And you read the
Mhm.
book, the whole theory behind it is like different than what a lot of leadership books will talk about is what this their philosophy was much more around leading into your strengths. Lean into your
Yeah.
strengths and addressing any critical flaws rather than strengthening your weaknesses, right? And they give all these
Yep.
examples around sports. I think one was like Tiger Woods. They talked about like his ability to drive the ball versus other things, and like, but it was all like leads to the things that you're good at, and of course, if you have a fatal flaw, you have to be able to address it. But after doing this, everyone will get like this profile kind of built out. It would get your top 5.
Yeah.
When I got mine, and I don't forget, I forget now, it's a long time ago what exactly they were, but they were whatever you think. If we were to run a survey, say like, what do you think are the most important qualities of a leader? The most stereotypical qualities of a leader, let's call it that. And
Uh-huh.
it was like command, strategy, like they were all like very going back to like
Uh-huh.
they were all very like heady and very like
Y
we're gonna get it done, right? Like and also like a start, and I got those, right? Like I got pretty much all of those.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then we were doing this session around the room, and a good friend of mine who was there, who also had a very successful law practice in Vegas,
Mm,
gave his, and his 5 were like harmony, was
mhm,
understanding, was like all of these things that I remember sitting there, this like arrogant prick, which is me. I was sitting here hearing this guy tell these things, and I'm like judging him. I'm like that
mm,
doesn't sound like a leader, right? Like what is that? Like camp counselor? Like what are
mm,
we talking about, right? And I literally had that moment where I caught
mm.
myself saying, like, "You
Yeah.
really are arrogant." Like, here is this person who you know pretty well is super successful. He's so successful, not only did he have a successful law practice, for funsies, he went and started buying radio stations for funsies because he was doing some advertising and he was like, "I like doing this. I'm just gonna go buy some of these." And you're questioning his leadership style. You're questioning
Mm,
what are the elements that make him successful. Like, what are you? And it was like such a moment of arrogance that I had. And
mm.
it went, but like those were, it's a lot of things, but when you go back and sort of not think back on what were all those moments that sort of led to this
Yes.
recognition that there was this whole other aspect that I was not giving enough credence to, attention to, that I was not prioritizing in my life,
Mhm.
that
Mm.
are actually super important to driving
Yes.
success, to leading folks. Like that was I think a great humbling moment. And I went through the whole arc
I
in hearing this and I was like, "Oh, wow, like, you really are." So,
uh,
I wasn't kind to myself. Like I said,
I
it goes back
love
to what I was
that.
telling you.
Listen, I love that you challenged yourself in that way and that you had that realization, first of all, because I think there's a lot of people who wouldn't have that realization,
Yeah.
who would just be perfectly content to be arrogant
Sure. Yeah, yeah,
in that moment,
yeah.
But I just think it's such a great anecdote for how you can have all different types of archetypes
Sure. Yeah.
end up being successful leaders, and that each of you and each of us have something to learn from someone who has a completely different way of showing up and doing that thing,
Yeah.
and can still be successful. And then what I love about what it did for you and what I think really does make you a great leader and is what makes anyone a great leader is not shutting that down just to preserve your own
Right.
ego, but instead to go and investigate that, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's really what it's about. And I think for him, looking maybe at his empathizer, neutralizer, whatever his I'm sure he was looking at your strategy and command and be like, "Hmm, maybe I should do some more of that."
Yeah,
Like,
man,
I
yeah.
think that that's
Yeah.
part of it. Even though I do think, to your point, StrengthsFinder is not about it's not about, like, trying to be better at the
Yeah.
other strengths. Um, but I think that's such a beautiful anecdote of
Yeah.
how it there is not one archetype to lead, and there are so many different ways to be successful. And in the end, I do think I don't have harmonizer either, though I wish I did, as a strength. I think that is one of the most special strengths that's there is
Mhm.
figuring out ultimately, all of us who are leading in any capacity are trying to figure out how to help people not only be their best, but help other folks work together so that we can literally go through this life harmonizing, hopefully, like, I just think that's such
Yeah.
a special thing to keep in our minds. Um, I love this conversation, Jesus, so much, and I just think, I know that we could go on, and I'm having flashbacks right now of sitting in rooms with you, and, you know, we got to share space with a lot of incredible people with incredible minds, having lots of interesting intellectual debate, and in a really I just I loved the safety of that space in
Mhm.
knowing that everyone cared about the outcome. Uh, for those of you listening, Jesus was, and still is part of the Digital Innovation and Advisory Council at ALSAC St. Jude, and that's where we met.
Mhm.
And I think the conversations we got to have there when everyone is caring so much about this mission and caring so much about how we help find cures and save children, that we're willing to have tough conversations around how you're going to get there. And that to me was ultimately not just having empathy for the kids getting treated at the hospitals and the families that were
Mhm.
impacted by that, but the donors that we were working with and who were supporting that mission, and then the employees in the organization who were also trying to drive that. Some of those conversations that we had, did they just stay with me. So, I feel like getting to have this conversation with you right now is almost a full circle moment for me of just thinking about all the things we have all learned along the way
Mhm.
and how we've shared in that learning with one another and how special that really is to me. So thank you for being on this podcast and part of this and part of my development story. Like I'm not me without you. So I'm so grateful for you
I appreciate
truly.
it. No, this is fun, and,
Um
it's great to be reflective of these things, but even that, what you were just saying about creating those space, I think that is part of, for anyone that sees this and thinks about, "How do I build that?" Maybe sometimes empathy and that connection, that trust. I think it
yeah.
is a lot about creating those spaces where people can have honest conversations in a manner where it feels productive, even when there's a lot of disagreement. I think
Yeah.
that trust kind of comes from that, right? They'd be like, "Oh, I can share things, and it's okay. It's okay for us to disagree." And it is
Yeah.
especially responsibility of the person in charge because they set the tone,
Yeah.
right? So I think
Yeah.
that's a big kudos to
100%.
the leadership, especially at Alsac and what they did. Rick at the time, who was the CEO and started that process, and all of you that really were so open to having this kind of ongoing engagement and conversation.
Yeah.
But thank you for having me on the
It was
podcast. This
really
is great, great conversation.
okay, well, listen, but we're not done yet because I wanna do rapid fire
Ooh, all right.
questions with you. So these are quick
Quick answers.
answers,
All right.
and do your best. I know we like to talk things through, but do your best. So fill in the blank. Growth is
Needed. Yeah, it's needed. It is necessary. There is no steady state. So I do feel that you're either growing or you're going backwards. And
Mm.
it's something that we have to, and whether professionally or even personally, right? Like what we're just talking about, right? I am
Yeah.
a great example. You can't teach old dogs new tricks.
I love that. I love that. What's the very first thing you realized you were good at as a kid?
Puzzles. I was very good
Oh.
at puzzles. I'm very, which is so it's interesting, right? So good at puzzles. I think the way that I translate it to now is having things that are creating structure around things that are loosely laid out. Finding
Mm.
patterns, connecting dots. I will sit there, little kid, and just crank out puzzles. I was recently told that she was doing a, I don't know why we do like a puzzle with my partner. We were doing one, and then I found myself all of a sudden taking over, just doing it really quickly. And she was like, "You can't just do it." I'm like, "That's the competitive part of me." Well, working at it, but yeah, puzzles that I learned
That's
pretty
so
early on.
funny. That's great. That's great. What was your very first job?
I was like, do you remember? I mean, you're thinking you're too young for the show, but there was a show called Married with Children. Uh,
Of course I
you know, okay.
remember. I'm
Mm,
42 years
all
old.
right.
I'm not that
Okay.
young.
Well, I mean, so you barely heard it. I mean, I'm sure maybe you got the reruns. But anyway, so there was the main character in the show, Married with Children. His name was Al Bundy, and he was like a
Mhm.
football player, ex-football player in high school, and then he sold women's shoes. Well, my first job
Yes.
was selling shoes at your friendly Compton Kmart. And I played football in high school, so I
Oh
was literally
my
like the real
god.
life version of Al Bundy, selling shoes, selling
Oh
women's shoes.
my god.
Uh,
That
and
is
uh,
hilarious. Do you know who else sold women's
cool.
shoes as their first job? Ross Martin.
No kidding. See, that's why we get along, I guess.
That's
You know,
hilarious.
customer service is
That
super
is hila
important, and learning how to deal with
That's
people, that's
right.
critical,
That's
critical.
right. Oh my god, that is so funny. Um, who was the best boss you ever had?
Ooh, best boss. That is a great question. I've been pretty lucky. I've had a number of really good people that I've worked with. I would say one I would just name one boss. I don't know if I put him as the best boss. I worked for a lot
Yeah.
of really good people. One of them was when I first joined Univision, the president of radio, his name is Gary Stone. His name is Gary Stone.
Mm.
And part of the reason why I always appreciated him is that when I came into the media business, I knew nothing about media. I mean, nothing. I came
Mm.
in from the consulting world. I was just right out of business school. And he did so much for me in terms of giving me exposure and putting me in rooms that frankly I didn't belong in.
Mm.
And did so much to it was open to hearing ideas. I saw him masterfully just run conversations with a large group of people where he was getting a lot of input from them. And even if he already had an idea of what he wanted to do, his big thing was to try to create the consensus as to why we're doing something.
Mm.
And this is a time where I found that I didn't appreciate it enough when I was then. Now that I'm older, I see more the
Yeah.
value of that. But he was the president of the group. He could have just simply said, "We're doing this," and
Yeah.
good luck,
Yeah.
right? But he would
Mm.
go out of his way of trying to, create that kind of buy-in. And I really appreciate that about him. I think I learned a lot from him. And it's also because it's what introduced me to media. So working with them was, I think, was a pretty valuable lesson.
I love that. What's something you're trying to learn right now?
Oh, actually funny, but uh, I never the one thing that I wish I would have done in school is I wish I would have done computer science. I didn't realize how much I was
Okay.
going to enjoy
Mm.
that. I did a very little of
Mm.
it, little coding and development, going into like the workforce at Accenture. But I
Yeah.
never really got into it, and I felt like I really because it was much more logical than what I thought it was. And so one of the things that I'm
Yeah.
starting to play with is especially in a world of AI where there's so much vibe coding, this idea that you don't necessarily
Mhm.
need to
Mhm.
have the development
Yeah.
skills that were necessary before to build anything. So the idea of being able to like rapidly create products
Yeah.
using AI is something that I find fascinating, and very
Yeah.
excited to continue to learn and do more.
Yeah. It's vibe coding is so fun.
Yeah.
I will we'll have to talk about that more
Right.
later.
Love any
Um,
recommendations, by the way. Platforms,
yeah, for sure.
tools, training, I'm
Yeah.
all for it.
Yeah, well, you should definitely chat more. And let's see, what's something you're trying to unlearn?
I'll learn. I think we just finished having, I don't know, hour-long conversation
Yeah.
about I think there's a lot there that I feel has once again benefited me in how I think and how I approach. I think work ethic is one of them, but it can be at the expense of buy-in. It can be at the expense of trust. That's something.
Yeah.
It's not that I don't think I'm bad at it, but it's something that I have to be actively conscious to not let those
Mhm.
things creep in. So it's not so
Yeah.
much about
Yeah.
learning. I actually don't really believe in that. I think more is around accepting things that are part
Mhm.
of you and how you navigate it. If you
Mhm.
recall, when we did this leadership conference for ALSAC years ago, right?
Mhm.
I gave this whole chat around
Mhm.
embracing fear, right? Embracing your fears. And I talked
Yeah.
about the fact that I grew up really afraid of the water and of drowning. And as a
Mhm.
result, I ended up, doing a triathlon. I did multiple triathlons. And that was like my big aha moment is in going through that process, I never got over that fear. I still have it now. I was just in Miami, got in the
Mhm.
ocean, and it's still there. Like it's still, I'm
Yeah.
like, listen, you've done
Yeah. Yeah.
multiple triathlons. You could swim. I mean, you're a pretty capable
Mhm.
person, and it's still there. And the big aha moment is about accepting that as being part of who I am, and
Mhm.
therefore still doing those things, doing what I need to do in spite of those fears or with those
Yeah.
fears with me.
Yeah. That was a great talk. It was a really good talk. Name a book or movie that changed your life.
Mm. Uh, I love learning. I love the idea of learning and understanding connections that are maybe not obvious to people. Freakonomics, Super Freakonomics are probably two of my
Yeah.
favorite books for that reason.
Yeah.
I love the connections that they were able to make in that book to things that feel almost like completely disconnected. So it like really feeds a part of me that I love
Yeah. Yeah.
to investigate those.
That's
Yeah.
good. That's good. When growth feels good, how do you celebrate?
Oh, once again, it's not my core strength. You know how I celebrate? I celebrate through others. My joy is seeing
Mm,
joy in others.
mm,
Like I am happy when my daughter's happy. I am happy when my fiance is happy, when my family is happy. When they're happy, like I feel ecstatic. So it's not about
yeah,
me
yeah,
celebrating. It's I don't like it's just that doesn't, like that doesn't feed me. It's about seeing the happiness of other
yeah,
people.
yeah. When growth feels hard, how do you take care of yourself?
I think the way that I've taken myself primarily has been is trying to stay physically active when something is
Yeah.
mentally hard. Being physically active is really
Mm,
important.
Yeah.
is my biggest way that I've addressed stress is going out. Is like my therapy. I never was never really great at actual. And I would even say, like, as of late, I've learned to embrace therapy and talking about things and talking to people. It
Mhm.
wasn't always my strength to talk about things. It's not my strength now, but but I try. I'm getting better.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
my coping mechanism was sort of physical activity and to stay very, very active. And I think
Yeah.
that's a great one in terms of going back to the balance piece. That's the way that I process things.
Yeah, yeah. 2 more questions. What would your 8-year-old self say about the life you're living today?
Oh, my 8-year-old self. Yeah, I think growing up to where I did, we had some hard times, and
Mhm.
I'm not. I mean, there'll be a part of disbelief probably.
Yeah.
I think and it's not just my life. It's like what we, what our family, how far along we've come as a family.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
my oldest sister was the first in our entire extended family to go to college, and
Mm.
in one generation, from that to my brother's daughter, she's getting a PhD at Harvard in astrophysics. Like, that happened in one
Wow.
generation. Like, that's the power
Wow.
of opportunity, of working hard, of doing things. So, if
Yeah.
I told that to my year-old version, he'd be like, "What are you talking about? Like, this guy is wild."
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. Last question is, when you grow all the way up and you leave this life, what is it that you hope to congratulate yourself on?
Raising a good human being in my daughter.
Mm.
That's, I think, being someone that was, uh giving. I pride myself in being giving in my time and being giving to my family and not being a selfish person. I think legacy is one that I've sort of struggled a little bit with. I don't know what that actually means.
Mhm.
I don't need my name in any
Mhm.
building. Frankly, that's not that interesting.
Mhm. Yeah.
The things that are there's a lot of things that I've seen as just not as valuable. I think the impact that I have on people, and if I'm able to influence someone in a positive manner, I think that's what I'm hoping to kind of like.
I love I love that. Well, I'm so grateful for you doing this. I'm so grateful for you being in my life, even though we don't talk all the time. You always hold a special place in my heart. I'm so like proud of you. I love watching how your journey has unfolded over the last, I don't know, 7, 8 years of us knowing each other. And like, just thank you so much for
Get that.
being an inspiration in my life.
Well, thank you. No, thanks for having me. And the mutuals. I mean, the feeling is definitely mutual. And I'm a huge fan of yours. Here, when you launched your business, I think we talked pretty early on when you were doing that, and I was very
Yeah.
excited for you. And I think the best is yet to come.
Oh, thank you so much, Jesus.
Sure.
Well, thank you for this. We'll see you all later. Bye.